In our previous video, we talked about how to understand constructors in the context of inheritance. And here we look at an example as how we can use those concepts that we learned in that video. For example, we have this class animal, and the animal is extended by a bunch of subclasses, a bunch of animals, we can say, like a cat class, a crow class, a dog class. And we'll look at the behavior of constructors in this context as to how, like we said that in that video, we said that as soon as we create a subclass's object, a chain of calls, constructor calls, is generated. The first call is sent to the subclass's constructor, and straight away a call from the subclass's constructor is sent to the superclass's constructor. And we understand that we always need to call the superclasses constructor the first thing in the subclasses constructor. Here we'll look at this example. We have the animal class, which has two instance variables, and the name of type string, a color of type string. So the animal is supposed to have a name and a color. Then there are setter and getter methods for these two variables, and we also have a toString method that basically prints the details of the animal object, and that is the name and the color of the animal. Now we can see that we do not have a constructor in this class. And we understand that whenever we do not explicitly declare a constructor inside a class, Java declares a default constructor for us that is called the default constructor. That is a zero parameter constructor that is called a default constructor. Now when we are extending this class, public class cat extends animal, and this class, the subclass, has a constructor. Now when we create an object of this class, let's say here we create an object of the cat class, as soon as this object is created, you can see that a call is generated to the subclass's constructor, and we understand that from here a call will be generated to the default constructor of the superclass. Constructor of the superclass. Now we do not need to explicitly call that constructor. Implicitly, that is called implicitly by Java. If we need to implicitly call that constructor, we can use this keyword, the super, with a function call notation. But if you exclude this keyword from here, it won't matter to our compiler, because this is done by default for us. And this will happen as long as there is no explicitly declared constructor in our superclass. As soon as we declare a constructor, then we will need to call that constructor explicitly. If that constructor is not a zero parameter constructor, or it takes some parameters, we will need to call that constructor implicitly. Now here we understand that we can call the superclass methods right here. So for example, although we should not be calling the methods directly inside the constructor, but just for the sake of understanding that we can call these methods, we can send a name. Let's say this is a cat, so we can send a name to the superclass. This set name method, and we can also send a variable. Let's say the variable that we are getting through this constructor we can set these the values for those variables to the set methods of the animal class, that is the super class in our case. And if we try to print these details, what should the toString method of the superclass do is, we hope that once we print this object of the cat class, now the cat class's color is being followed, is being sent from this as an argument. We send this argument to the constructor of the cat class, then the cat class will send this value to the set color method of the super class, the animal class. We can directly call those methods inside this class, and we have seen this in the previous lecture. So if we try to print these details now, we should see that we can see that the details have been printed for us. My name is Kitty, my color is yellow. So we are able to access the superclasses method inside the subclasses constructor. Now let's say we have another class, and that is the dog class. The dog has its own variables. The dog has a sound variable, but the other two variables, the name and the color, these can be initialized through the superclass. We have seen this for the cat class, that we can initialize the subclasses variables through the superclass, and one way of doing that was to call the setter methods of the superclass and send the values for these variables into those methods that will initialize these variables for us. Now we have declared an object of the dog class that has three arguments: the name of the dog, a color of the dog, and the sound of the dog, whatever the sound of the dog is. You can obviously pass these values to the constructor of the dog class. What the dog class should do now is that it needs to pass these values to the superclass to be able to initialize these variables. Now one way of doing that was through calling the superclasses methods, and then we will see in the upcoming classes that it is not a good idea to call the setter methods inside the constructor of subclasses, or any overloadable method or overridable method. Calling any overridable method is not usually a good idea to call those methods inside the constructor of the subclass. Another way of doing this is to call the superclasses constructor and send these variables to the superclasses constructor. Now we understand that we can do this, but we do not have a constructor inside our superclass. For this to work, we need to declare a constructor inside our superclass. Now this superclass should take at least 2 parameters, and the data type of this parameter should be exactly of the same as the instance variable. Now we have declared a constructor, and what we can do is we can initialize these instance variables inside the constructor of the superclass. Yeah. Now this code, the dog class's constructor, this should work fine because we have called the superclass is constructor. What should happen is that these two variables, these should be sent to the superclasses constructor, and these will be initialized there, while the third variable, that is the sound variable, which is explicit exclusive to the dog class, it will stay there, and it has been initialized inside the constructor of the dog class. Since we do not have a get sound method inside the animal class, so we needed to declare a getter method for the sound so that we can display details of the sound once we print the object of the dog class. What should happen now is when we try to run this code, we need to compile it first. What the problem now will be that this constructor, the default constructor has disappeared now. It will no longer work. There is no default constructor in the animal class. There is only one constructor in the animal class, and that is a constructor with two parameters. What we need to do now is, there are two ways of correcting this. Either the first is to send these two values to the superclasses constructor. Another way of doing this will be to use multiple constructors in our superclass, so that it can satisfy the needs of both of its subclasses. Now we have declared a 0 parameter constructor, and we assume that the cat class, which was calling the default constructor, the superclass, should now be able to call the 0 parameter constructor without even declaring that constructor. We shall try and compile this project now. The compilation is good, and we can display the details of the cat now. The error has disappeared, and if we try to print the details of the dog, we should be able to display the details of the dog. And we can see that we are able to call the superclasses toString method through the subclass object. When we print the subclasses object, the superclasses toString method is called, and these details are displayed for us on the output window. And if we need to call the subclass method, this method is not there in the superclass. What we can do is we can display the details of the explicit the method that is exclusive to the subclass. We can display these details in the subclass. We can also have another constructor over here. So for example, if you do not want to call the default do not want to call the setter methods, for example, then we can have like another constructor over here, and color. This constructor should now be able to initialize the color variable. So for example, now instead of sending this this color variable to the set color method, what we can do is we can call superclasses constructor with one parameter. We can call the superclasses constructor with one parameter, and we shall see that if it works the same or not. If it works the same, it should display the details of the cat object for us on the output window, and we can see that it works the same as previously. So we are now explicitly calling the superclasses constructor with one parameter from the cat class, We are also calling the superclasses constructor with two parameters using this line. We are calling the superclasses constructor with two parameters, and both of the initializations work fine for us, as we can see in the output. And we can also call superclasses default constructor. Now there is another class called crow, and we are not passing any details to this class, but if we declare an object of the crow class, we should be able to print the default details. Let's say, for example, now we have a class which has no parameters, no constructor of its own. And we can call this with no arguments. And if we try to print the details of the crow class, we should get at most the default values, not more than that, because we are not sending any values to the crow class. So we should at best get the default values. We need to compile it first. Compilation is good. And we can run. So the null values are displayed for the crow class. My name is null, my color is null, as we can see. But the idea is that we now the crow class is constructor, because there is a constructor with no parameter. If we remove this parameter, this constructor even, let's see what happens when we absolutely remove this constructor from the crow class. What should happen now? If we do not get a compilation error, what happens is, and this is what we discussed in the lecture as well, that a default constructor for the crow class is called, which will call the zero parameter constructor of the animal class, this one. So let me separate these. So the default constructor of the crow class will call the zero parameter constructor of the animal class, and whatever the default values there are, those values will be displayed on the screen in the output window. So with the help of this example, we try to understand the behavior of the constructor in the context of inheritance. And we need to remember that the first thing that we need to do in the subclasses constructor is to call the superclasses constructor, as we have done over here, as we have done over here, and as has been done by default for us in this class as well. So this was a bit of explanation with the help of an example of the constructors in the context of inheritance. We will continue the inheritance topic in the next lecture as well. Thank you.